started. My name is Anna Selberg. I'm from Wayne State University Law Library in Detroit. And this is a session we call Law Student as Cyborg. We have two very good speakers today. I was really lucky to find them. And they'll be speaking to you in just a minute. But I'm going to just give you a couple of words about how this session came about. I found recently, in doing a little bit more research, that I was really behind the curve, and I thought I was way ahead, in that I started to think a few years ago about the technology that we're using today, and Wayne State isn't known particularly for its advanced technology, but we're pretty much in the middle of the pack. And I started to look, when I was working with law students, at how the technology that we were using, things like CALR, CALI, other kinds of things like that, were affecting the way that students seem to be learning the law. And right along about that same time, I saw a presentation by Kathleen Vanden Heuvel from Berkeley at the American Association of Law Libraries meeting. I think that was in Boston, in which she mentioned that she was talking about teaching legal research to law students, and she started to mention just in passing about how she thought that law students were learning the law in what I've now come to know as law bites. And so our two speakers will address that topic and hopefully offer a couple of solutions to it. I'm just going to give you a few law bites, sound bites to get us started. First of all, the bibliography for this presentation will be on the web at the CALI website, but I have a couple of readings that I especially want to cite to you right now, things that I depended on when I was thinking about this. One is an article from the October issue of 1998 of the American University Law Review called Technocentrism and the Soul of the Common Law Lawyer by Molly Warner Lynn. She's at Chicago Kent. And another one by Barbara Bintliff in 88 Law Library Journal in 1996 called From Creativity to Computer Ease, Thinking Like a Lawyer in the Computer Age. Both of them, as I said, are really way ahead in their thinking about this. I feel like I've really come late to thinking about the fact that we need to think about how law students are reacting and learning in this kind of environment. Just a quotation or two from the Molly Lynn reading. She says, although technology enhances the study and practice of law, its use subtly changes the way lawyers reason and think. She also says that print sources are easily, when you're using a print source, you can easily distinguish among those sources, but when you have digital data, that's much harder to do. Something that Barbara Bintliff says, meaning doesn't come from data alone, and lawyers must understand that law is more than rules. It's social context, morality, and emotion. So with that, I'll turn it over to Michael Levy from Berkeley.
I'm just going to try and turn the lights down a tad. Does that make it better? Thank you. Great. I think I did.
Lesson 1.
Now we'll see if this will work at all. Well, I may have to just do it without the presentation. Okay. Let's do it. Well, I'll start even though he's trying to get that going. I don't want to take up too much time. I'm the Electronic Services Librarian at Baltimore School of Law, UC Berkeley. And I've been coming at this presentation from two parts of my job there. One is working on the reference desk and seeing how students come and ask questions and the type of questions I get about doing research. And the second part is being involved in the teaching of advanced legal research. The course has been taught by Bob Bering and Kathleen Van Havel for many years now, and I started helping them out on the class maybe about 5-6 years ago. And it's instructive as I've seen students go through the course over the last 5 years to see how their approach to research in both electronic and a paper form has changed over time. And in this presentation I've actually gone through... Great, thanks. In the presentation, I've actually gone through student papers from advanced legal research and pulled out some of the comments they make about how they're doing research, how they're doing online research compared to how they're doing manual research, and some of that will come up as I'm going through here. I've entitled this Getting into a Position to Think, and the reason I started with that is that I came across an influential article from 1960 by somebody called J.C.R. Licklider, who went on to be intimately involved in the birth of the internet, and he wrote a very influential article called Man-Computer Symbiosis, where he was imagining a technological future where the researcher, in this case he was a high-level physicist, interacting with a computer. And this is a quote from him here. I think the most important thing is the last clause there, which says, preparing the way for a decision or an insight. He regarded all the work that he did getting to that point where he needs to make a decision or insight as somehow something that could be taken over by a computer, as opposed to something that he as a human should be doing. And this is the quote that I think is the most important one. He says, 85% of my thinking time was spent getting into a position to think, to make a decision, to learn something I needed to know. Much more time went into finding or obtaining information than digesting it. And he was suggesting that once we got, and he described it back in those days as a symbiotic relation between a man and a fast information retrieval and data processing machine. And he felt that that data processing machine would do a lot of the work, this 85% of the time that he was spent getting into the position to think and do his real work, and that the computer would take over that task. And I'd like to suggest that by devaluing that 85% of his time, which I feel our students do, that they actually become poorer researchers because of that. Because they're not actually spending much time thinking about the research problem before they get involved in doing it. That sort of comes out. This came from the University of Calgary, and the professor who put this together tried to divide up computer capabilities and human capabilities. And obviously, computers are precise, they're meant to be fast and accurate, they're tireless, objective and robust, whereas compared to humans we learn from experience, we can handle ill-defined problems, we have a certain amount of judgment, ethics and responsibility. And what I'd like to suggest is that our students, as they go through the law school experience, are actually taking on some of these computer capabilities and less of the human capabilities. Anybody who's set a student a research assignment and they come back and say, well, I browsed through 1,000 cases and these are the ones I thought were important. Well, I mean, that's they're pretty timeless. They're down in the computer labs for hours and hours doing this stuff. And so I think that some of the comments that I get from the student papers will sort of show how the students are approaching these sort of problems. In terms of the utilization of computers in legal research, I mean, this goes back, we all know, to the early 1970s. And at the moment, I think we're in a transitionary phase here. We're moving from a paper to a digital environment, but the two mediums here are coexisting alongside each other, somewhat uneasily, I believe. And a good example, is the Shepard's Keysight examples. Shepard's existed in paper format for 100 years before we moved into a digital environment. And I can see no real good reason, maybe somebody can tell me a good reason why you would want to use this in paper anymore. It seems a prime example of something that works much better in a digital environment than it does in a paper environment. And of course there's something like Keysight, which never existed in a paper format and is purely a digital product. I think that the issue for legal research really is finding this balanced approach to doing legal research, to knowing when you're going to be using paper resources, knowing when you're going to be using electronic resources. Because in many cases, I believe that unlike the Shepard's example, where I believe the electronic format is way superior to the paper format, I think there's many occasions where you have to sometimes be using something that exists in paper and then maybe using it as it exists in a digital format. And I believe that looking at how our students work in legal research classes is that they're actually relying much more on the electronic resources to the detriment of others. Of course, there's been a lot of work done about the inherent problems with doing online searching. And I'm just going to go through these very quickly, so I'm sure you're all very familiar with them. The major problem, I believe, of the students actually formulating a meaningful query when they go into a database. The students have to formulate a Boolean query, and recently with natural language systems they don't have to do that so much, but students are real keen on, okay, I'm going to do a good Boolean search here, which is going to get me the answers back, and then I can move on. And we all know that there's many problems involved with that. Of course, we have just user error. They don't know how to use the database properly. They're searching in Lexis, and they're searching for a California case in the last 10 years, and they're using GenFed Mega, the biggest database that's possible. Or they're not using the sophisticated searching capabilities that the online vendors are providing. And of course, there's perennial problems with homographs, synonyms, antonyms. Formulating a search where there's a context dependency makes it very difficult to do searching. And of course, then using inference and analogy when you're doing legal research. Going back to the 80s, there was Blair and Maron's famous study which showed that about when people were doing searching in a legal database, they retrieved about 20% of the relevant documents that were actually in that database. And then, of course, there's Dan Dabney sitting over there, his article in Law Library Journal on the Cursor Famous to work on recall and precision. You should go and read that article because it's still just as relevant today as it was 12 years ago when it was written. I found that our students don't really understand the limits of their full text searching. And this comes across when we teach advanced legal research. Advanced legal research is taken by second years and third years. It's not a required course, but I would say about 80% of students graduate from both taking this class. And in this class, one of the overarching themes throughout the course is comparing and contrasting the tools that you're using. And in the examples that I'm going to give, it's a case research problem that we gave them, and we forced the students to use American law reports in paper, National Digest system in paper, Lexis and Westlaw to do their case research. And I found that once you force the students to evaluate these different resources, then they actually get a better sense of different pros and cons of the various tools. But then some of them still don't get it either. This is one quote. No fancy knowledge was needed when using electronic databases because you could just use common factual rather than legal terms. So you basically put anything in and you get something back. And I like this one a lot. In electronic search, you need only determine good search terms and the cases are retrieved in front of your eyes. So you just need to determine the good search terms. That's all you need to do, which of course is incredibly difficult. But in this case, the student felt, oh, okay, this makes researching easy. Hey, just put in the search terms and you'll get something back. I like to call this the video game theory of research, and I won't take credit for it. It's Kathleen Van Havel that's what she calls it, so I stole it from her. And I feel that students are spending less time in Licklider's phraseology of getting in a position to think, and more time just putting words into a computer. They like precise searching to retrieve, quote-unquote, the answer. That's what students like to do. They like to perform an extremely precise search, and they get a small body of results that they can go through. That's the ideal. So it's like sort of playing a video game, right? You just sort of hone in, and then you shoot, and you get your results back. This means that they don't really see what is around them. And these are direct quotes from student papers doing case research. I wish I was making this up, but I wasn't. I blew up the screen with my perfect search. One that I didn't put on there was sometimes they actually add sound effects in there. I was looking through 500 cases, and then halfway through, kaboom! There was the one I needed. That really is what somebody wrote. Just a little more on that. I also believe that the seduction of the speed and the ease of doing online research gives rise to the feeling amongst the students that they've actually done successful research. Hey, it's relatively easy in their eyes. You just type things in. And this is my favorite quote. I like the idea of commando research, just me and a huge database and using luck and skill to find what I need. Flipping through digest is not as exciting or as quick as running different electronic searches. So that's what the person wanted to do, the commando research. Now, I do want to say that probably maybe about 20-25% of students, I think, sort of have this approach to doing research. We're in a slightly artificial environment because we're assigning them a task where they have to compare manual and electronic research. And a lot of the students, when they're forced to go through this exercise, say, actually, using American law reports and paper really helped me frame the problem here, really helped me find out what the parameters of this area were. And then when they did go online and do their research, they got better results because of that. As I was doing a little bit of reading for this, I also came across a paper which had a fantastic title, so I had to read it. It was called Silicon Sycophants, The Effects of Computers That Flatter. And some social scientists have done some research where they discovered that praise from a computer is actually extremely powerful. And they say that praise makes people feel better about themselves, their performance, the interaction, and the computer of offering the evaluations. And when they were talking about the sort of messages you get back from a computer when a program, when you do something wrong or you do something well. And I'd like to suggest that our students' use of online databases is a way, an implicit form of flattery, because anything that they type in, unless it's completely stupid, they'll get something back. And it's like, okay, type something in, get something back. It's a lot easier than actually going to use, say, the index of American law reports, where you could be flailing around for quite a while trying to get into the right area of the problem that you're solving. But when you're sitting down at the computer, hey, you type something in, you get the results back. Hey, well, I'm not a bad researcher. Look, I got stuff back here. And that comes across quite a lot when you're looking through the student paper. I think the only time students sort of get upset is when they get nothing back at all. They just search, they get 0 results, then it's like, okay, there's something wrong here. Because when they get something back, then they're usually okay. And I think also that they view the search software, as it's becoming more sophisticated and easier to use, is actually deceptively easy. And I feel that their students are not spending the time getting to use some of the more sophisticated capabilities that both Lexis and Westlaw and other vendors are offering. Another thing that comes across when you're looking at student papers is the inability or the problems with understanding the structure of the information resource. And I have a few examples from really working at the reference desk as well as teaching. The first one is understanding the type of materials they're using. If a student doesn't understand what an index is compared to a full text database, then when they go and do searching, they get all confused and don't understand why they don't get very good results. A number of times people come to the reference desk, say I was searching legal track, and I couldn't find the full text of any of these articles. Well, you know, it's an index, it's not a full text database, and trying to get this across is difficult. When they've never used an index in paper, then they find it hard to visualize what an index would be like when you're searching it online. So related is the nature of the document. What are you searching? The nature of the document. If somebody's used to doing web searching, and then you tell them, actually, we want you to go and use American law reports, it's a little problematic if they've never seen American law reports in paper. It's a relatively complex set, has lots of indexes and finding tools in there and added secondary material. And if a student has never seen that in paper, has never seen how that's organized and the work that's gone into it, when they go and try and search that online, you're flailing around and it's very difficult to navigate. And an example I think that comes up all the time for me is students using annotated codes online. The video game mentality of researchers honing in on a particular code section. And when they're doing that, they're not actually seeing that this code section may be part of a broader statutory schema which they need to take into consideration. And if they were using this in paper, or they at least knew how the paper worked, they would say, well, I have this code section, but I'm sure it's probably related to the one after it and the one before it. And most of the time, students aren't really thinking in this way. It's instructive that I've had many faculty members say to me, well, I'm pretty good at using Lexis and Westlaw finding cases, but I really have a real hard time using the annotated code. And could you give me some assistance? I said, well, the best thing to do is just go down to the library and go to the reading room and pull it off the shelf. And they go, thanks very much. I'm really glad they feel that I've actually allowed them to get out their desk and go and do this. Because I think it's actually, most of the time it's actually easier to use. To counter some of the quotes before of the students who were doing the kaboom stuff, many of the students, after they've gone through this sort of exercise, do see the benefit of having a sort of balanced approach to research. And just a couple of quotes. Although this probably sounds anachronistic, I liked the feeling of opening up the digests and being able to scan and make use of the organizational work already done for me. So the students said, oh, this is useful. Somebody's done a lot of work here to actually help me in my research process. And another one, I would have been hopelessly lost in virtual reality had I not started out with paper. Unrealistic expectations. We all know about unrealistic expectations of the online coverage. A student comes to the reference desk and says, I can't find this committee report on Lexis or Westlaw. And I said, okay, yes, it's from 1948. Well, it's not going to be on there. Students have a hard time understanding this. There was a point pre-Lexis and Westlaw. But things have got worse because now everything's on the web, right? So the person says, I can't find the 1948 report on the web. And I think it's up to us as who are working in law schools to try and actually get some semblance of reality into the students here. Another problem that I've come across working at the reference desk is, this is sort of really aimed at the librarians here, it's sort of a logistical one, is that the centre of the law school where I work has moved away from the reading rooms in the library down into the computer labs. And what you have students sitting down at their computers, they're doing their email, they're checking the soccer scores, they're searching Lexis, they're searching Westlaw, and they're writing a paper all at the same time. And they're not getting up out of their seat and saying, well, I don't really understand how to do that search, or my research is not going too well here, I'll go and ask a reference librarian. I feel that has become sort of problematic. And I would say that in the 5-6 years I've been working at Bolt, the amount of traffic at the reference desk, this is unscientific, I haven't measured it, has certainly gone down. And I think in some ways we're losing the students and our ability to actually influence the way that they do their research. there's much more unmediated access to information now, which is a great thing. I mean, it's sort of, information democracy. But the flip side of this is that there's unmediated access to information. We're not looking over their shoulder when they're searching Hotbot and trying to help them out here. And also there are issues of trust and credibility about the information that's put up there, especially in a web environment. We all know that a 14-year-old boy in his garage can put up a fairly decent website. So we have, I say, the Cyborg law student, and this is an animation that a friend of mine who's an animator did in a different environment. So I think that the research environment is actually more complex than it was 25 years ago. There's just many, many more different types of resources. A young lawyer or student has to master paper, CD-ROM, online databases, databases provided by the web, and it's all becoming very complex. And the student needs to know, and the young lawyer needs to know, what is the best resource to use at what part of their research process. Just sitting down in front of the computer all the time isn't going to make them a good researcher. And when students have been forced to compare and contrast, then I think that they become a better researcher. Once they leave advanced legal research and go off and practice in the real world, I don't know what happens to them. So maybe they forget everything they learned and just sit down on the computer again. And I'd like to suggest that students are acting more like the computer model that we saw before. They're tireless and patient and physically robust and relatively unsophisticated. And they're sitting, going through 1,000 cases and pulling them out, and 5 hours later they can, say, hey, I did good research. They can't really do that in the law environment when they're out practicing in the real world. Of course, there's many positive developments, and I don't need to go through these. Just the sheer number of resources out there, just amazing. The ability to hypertext, and the really sophisticated search tools and systems that the vendors are producing now, Shepherd's and Keysight. And I think this is all really exciting stuff, and it's exciting stuff to be a student now. But they still need to take in consideration that there's a whole body of research and ways of doing research that aren't fallen by the wayside. So finally, what is to be done, as Lenin said, and I hope there's no anarchists from the anarchist convention. Perhaps I should have Kropotkin on there or something. I don't know if I really have amazing suggestions here. I think we need to keep on training our students on the limitations of online research, positive parts and the negative parts. I think that's very important. Students need to understand complexity and balance, the ability to compare, contrast, and evaluate different resources in different environments, a holistic approach to research, and the importance of them getting into a proper position to think, of being able to sit down and say, okay, this is a research problem that I'm facing here. What's the best way of approaching it? What's the best tool to use at this particular moment? I think as reference librarians, we need to be rethinking how we do reference. How do we get into the computer labs, and how do we help the students when they're sitting at their desk? And I think we need to keep on giving feedback to the vendors, saying, hey, we want better and more expert systems, things that are going to help our students, that are going to help them formulate queries and be more effective researchers. I'm not sure that I have any great ideas about how to broach the sort of bridge between these two worlds, and I'm sure that when we have questions at the end, people might have some suggestions about that. Okay.
Hi, my name is Michelle Kendrick. I'm a professor at the Washington State University in Portland. We have a branch campus that's right across the river in Vancouver. And I teach in a really new program. We've only had this program going for about 3 years. It's electronic media and culture. My training, my background is I have a PhD in English. And you may ask what that has to do with technology or electronic media. My dissertation committee did. But basically what I study is how electronic media in particular, but technology in general, affects the way that we as a culture sort of understand ourselves, understand education, understand kind of our construction of society, as it were. I was going to open with something a little bit different, but I'm kind of switching midstream here because of some of the things that Michael said. The way that I got interested in studying technology was that I started writing about the Persian Gulf War late in my graduate school career, and it got me to thinking about computer technologies in particular. And I began to realize that all of this kind of thinking about technology was connected in really intimate ways. That is, that our teaching with technology is not really separate from our cultural attitudes and kind of our cultural positions vis-a-vis and related to technology. That is, the way that we conceive of technology is going to certainly affect the way that we use it in the classroom and the kinds of possibilities that we can envision for it. And so I started studying the way the Persian Gulf War used precisely those kind of, and this is nothing that you haven't heard, but used precisely those kind of parameters of the video game. But even those video game parameters are based on something further and deeper in our understanding about computers. That is that they're efficient, rational. They are machines that what Paul Edwards called create a closed world. They create a kind of contained and understandable, precise and numerical kind of world. And that, I think, is still, despite all of our rhetoric about webs and links and associations, I think that's still the foundational bedrock kind of understanding of computers, is that they're these rational thinking machines. And so when our students go to these machines to do these searches, they're expecting what comes back to still be coming back from that kind of foundational rationality. And so I think that's a kind of a core thing to understand. And in fact, one of the things that I looked at after sort of researching Persian Gulf War and how that the computer sort of controlled the narrative that we were fed about that war, I'm writing an article right now on Kosovo. And in reality, what the Kosovo crisis has shown us with, say, the World Wide Web, is that it's a multi-voiced, clashing, incredibly complex, incredibly hard to decipher and get precise information from. In researching the Kosovo problem, I've been at websites that are by the CALI and by the Serbs and by the Albanians and by some student in the basin in California who's putting up a sympathetic website for one side or the other, and who knows what kind of history we're getting and what kind of precise information we're getting. And so, but we still continue, I think, at some core to believe that somehow these machines will give us what we need from them. So I want to talk a little bit, maybe in more general terms than Michael did, about how our attitudes, our cultural attitudes, our understandings about technology affect the way that we teach. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think some of those attitudes are, sort of the poles, the kind of ends of the scale, as it were. Andrew Feenberg calls these the instrumentive and the substantive theory of technology. And basically, one theory of technology, one end of this pole, is that technology consumes us. That's just kind of the technological determinist view of technology. Technology creates everything that we are and can be. It sort of forces our society down a certain path. We make decisions based on kind of the technologies that push us one way or the other. Technology shapes us. Technology. A lot of my students, and maybe your students as well, have this view. When you start talking to them about technologies, they have this idea that it's just sort of steamrolling us. There's nothing we can do. I teach a course called Cyborgs, our technology ourselves, where we look at precisely at interventions, technological interventions in identity. And we read about all these medical technologies and about computer technologies and online learning, that kind of thing. And my students inevitably come back, a certain percentage of them, and say, well, there's nothing we can do about this. It's just going to happen. These technologies are going to take over our lives, and we might as well just sort of roll over and, go with the flow, and there's nothing we can do. Technology takes us over. The opposite end of that scale is the idea that technology is simply a tool. It's no more or less than a screwdriver a computer is. It's just a tool. Depends on who uses it. To give a brief example of this, probably a polarization we're all familiar with would be the atomic bomb. There's some people who were on the side said the Cold War and the atomic bomb shaped a whole nuclear culture. The Generation X left us with a generation of people who are nihilistic and who are materialistic. We're all going to blow each other up, and so we might as well get as much as we can as soon as we can, because who knows what's going to happen 10 years down the line. That kind of far end of that kind of technological determinism. And there are other people who argue, the nuclear bomb is no more or less moral than a screwdriver. It's simply a tool, like any other tool that we've created, that gets used in a particular manner. Both of these binaries, both of these positions have influenced the way that we discuss teaching online and teaching and researching and our kind of practices online. And so I'm going to briefly sort of go through the pros and cons from each position, and then I'm going to talk about kind of a synthesis, a way of sort of thinking our way out of that binary. A way of thinking ourselves out of either passive victims of technology or the masterful users of technology, a way to thinking our way to some kind of more complexity, I think. In the consuming culture model, in the technological determinist model, in terms of interactive learning, online learning, what I would say that probably, and I'm going to miss some here, these are just some general ones that I thought of, and I'm sure you could add to the list. The pros, the positive things about learning online in this model are that somehow the very qualities of the learning environment itself will kind of infect or pressure or create the kind of student learner that we want. And so you'll hear the argument that, well, it's interactive, right? If students can make choices, and somehow those choices are going to create in them the ability to make good choices. Somehow the very interactive nature of the computer environment itself is going to give our students that ability to be interactive in and of themselves. It's associative and visual, right? You've heard that. It operates more like the human brain in that, and thus it enables a whole new kind of learner that has been left behind by the linearity and hierarchical thinking of print culture. And so you see a lot of people saying, well, because it's this way, it's going to enable this kind of student. It's going to create that kind of student. And somehow it's more democratic, right? We've all heard that argument, that it's blind to physical bodies. So race, gender, class, somehow it's all going to be sort of melted away in the digital environment, and we're all going to have equal say. It's not going to be no longer sort of who you are and what position you occupy vis-a-vis your body or your class. It's going to be somehow we're all going to enter into this space. It's going to be more democratic. Again, that's that model in which the technology is going to create all this. Somehow the very things that we have created, built into the technology, is going to sort of mold that student user. The cons, kind of the reverse side of that argument, is probably the one you've heard more popularly anyway, the MTV argument, right? Oh, that this is too much like an MTV video. Now, I was talking to this with a colleague, and she said, make sure you tell them that most people think MTV videos are bad. I don't know. So is MTV like fragmented, broken, fast-paced, somehow just sort of seducing our senses rather than engaging our minds, and that's what the World Wide Web or other learning environments can be like, right? So you've had that experience. I've had that experience. You go on to research something, click, 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 and somehow you're at a garden.com and you're designing your backyard. Right? Seduction of images. That's the other argument you get, is that you're going to be seduced by images. I mean, this is an argument that goes back, right, to at least back as far as Plato, who says that these images, we have ways in which to evaluate print culture. We have ways that we've historically developed over several hundred years, but we have no way to evaluate images. They're simply seductive. They simply pull at us for our pleasure and our senses. And so you hear people saying, this is what's happening in a learning environment on the web, is that it's simply seducing us with images. The loss of authority, and I think that this gets to the heart of a lot of the kind of research problems with online materials, is that students don't know where they're coming from, and they don't bother to find out. They don't bother to find out, if you think of the last interesting website that you were at, do you know who authored it precisely? Do you know what part of that site was authored by which individual, if there's indeed a list at the end of webmaster versus content provider versus, we're losing that kind of sense of at least the argument goes, of responsibility, of direct responsibility to an author who stands behind his or her printed words on a page. And it's irrevocable and unchangeable. So if you print an article that later turns out to be idiotic, it stands there in print forever. On the digital realm, you go take it off the server, that kind of thing. And so we're losing this idea that we're losing a sense of responsibility, that we no longer stand behind our words as an authority in any way. And then, of course, the loss of context, and I think that's what Michael was getting at, is that students no longer, the argument goes, no longer have a context or a sense of history for anything, is that they find these things all kind of on, if you think about the web and about digital environments as kind of a vast space, most of the metaphors being used now are spatial metaphors, right? So you think about this huge, vast spatial arena. It doesn't have any kind of temporal depth to it. It all seems to be right on the surface, and students view it that way. So that they jump here to here to here to here to here, click, 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 and they don't get any sense of where these things are historically related to each other. They don't get any sense of kind of through time how these things developed and fed one another, and how this case led to this case, was used in this case, that kind of thing. They can lose that kind of progression. And I think that sort of loss of context and temporality and history is something that gets critiqued a lot. And so somehow, again, it's like those arguments compelling. I think many of them are very compelling. But again, they are sort of taking the physical nature of the machine, saying these things exist on the way that we've designed the World Wide Web, and somehow that is going to form our users. Somehow this fragmented, broken, click, click, click mentality is going to be the brain of our students, right? Fragmented, broken, and unable to concentrate, unable to get any depth. The tool view is much more simple, probably the arguments, the pros and the cons. The pros come in that this is fast, it's powerful, it allows us to store more information than ever before. This is a great tool. I mean, this is something you can really use, you can put your weight behind. It's got larger and larger databases available. You've had this experience, you go onto the web. Every time you go onto the web, there's more there. There's more information there that somebody has taken the time to put up. And anyone can create, use, add to, comment on the various resources online. And that's a pro and a con, but often gets used as saying as a positive of this, that it's a tool that anyone can use. I mean, leave aside if they can afford it or have access to it or whatever, but if you have access to it, you can use it, you can get online. And the cons, not all have access to this tool. That's the kind of access question that lurks behind all of this. Who has access to it? Well, whose tool is it? It's primarily, as we know, a first world tool. The 20 countries with the highest internet capabilities are all first world countries, and Singapore is one of them. And the other argument is it's too easy a tool to use, right? Anyone can put up a website, anyone can get on and click, 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 and think they're doing legal research. It's too easy. There needs to be more complexity in that kind of interface. So those are the kind of tool use. This pro and con model, this kind of, it either is this good, bad kind of thing, locks us, I think, into kind of thinking about computers and online learning as either a utopian or a dystopian phenomena. And so all of the things that you tend to read tend to, again, there's a scale. They tend to fall on one end or the other of the scale. So you have the kind of Neil Postman grouches over here who say that, we're all, going to hell in a handbasket, we're not going to be able to think. And then you have these other people over here saying, this is exploding print culture. This is the most exciting thing that's happened since Gutenberg. And so you get these. Neither one of these models, I think, accurately reflects what's going on with computers, and neither one of these models leaves us a whole lot of room to teach and to research and to work with computers differently than the established kind of technological scale that we have. I don't think we are either subservient cyborgs, that is, we are neither sort of masters of our tools or victims of our tools. The truth is that, of course, like most truth, it's somewhere in the middle, and it's in that kind of gray area that exists between the poles. That is, technology has an effect on us. We can't deny that, and computers are here to stay. Online learning is here. It has an effect. It's going to continue to have an effect on the kind of students we turn on, the kind of research we do. But in turn, we have a certain kind of effect on our technologies, and that we have a certain kind of power. We can create, mold, change the way things get used. And so the truth is much more complicated and woven than these views would lead us to believe. Bruno Latour is a French sociologist, and he studies science studies, but he also studies a lot about technology. He's kind of an offshoot of that. And he argues that we have certain objects in our culture, inanimate objects, that are what he describes as quasi-objects, And he describes them as agents in their own right. That is, they are inanimate objects, but they have this kind of force in our society. His theory attempts to break free from the dualism which accords technology no power or makes technology all-powerful. Latour argues that in one of our kind of modern discourses, objects count for nothing, and he's quoted, "They are the white screen onto which society projects its cinema." So that kind of notion that online, the World Wide Web is simply a screen that's just, we're sort of projecting our kind of energy on. But in an alternate discourse, they are so powerful they themselves shape human society. Quasi-objects, argues Latour, are much more social, much more fabricated, much more collective than the hard parts of nature, but they are in no way the arbitrary receptacles of a full-fledged society. On the other hand, they are much more real, non-human, and objective than those shapeless screens on which society, for unknown reasons, needs to be projected. So this distinction is false, as Latour argues. The truth is in the complicated middle. The relationship is dialectical and complex, and we always have to keep that in mind and not sort of simply move from one end of the scale to the other. It's not predetermined in a direct way. There's a lot of kind of technological determinist arguments that get made about this kind of stuff. And there's nothing inherent about the media that's predetermining the kind of learners we turn out, the kind of researchers we are. There's something that remains within our control. I think we have to avoid that easy way out. We must think our way to a third turn. And Donna Hairaway is useful here. Donna Hairaway is a feminist. She studies feminist social studies of science. And she argues for this kind of online rhetoric that gets used a lot. She argues that what it does is it poses what she calls a kind of cultural relativism. That is, when we enter online, we have the idea, like Michael's students, that we have access to everything and that we can get there. It's sort of that kind of, if you're any science fiction fans here, it's like a cyberspace world you project yourself into and you fly around. You have access to anything, a kind of neuromancer world of cyberspace. And she calls that the God's eye view. She says it's a trick. It's the view from everywhere and nowhere, that we can go in and we can see everything. We don't have a specific position from which to stand. We're simply floating around in these kind of information worlds. And she says that we have to think ourselves out of that God's eye view. That is not a position in which anyone can occupy. It's not a valid position. It's not a position from which to research, critique, or to think from. And she offers kind of, as a guiding principle, to think about three things, and she calls them the stakes in location, the stakes in embodiment, and the stakes in partial perspective. And I'll kind of go through those really quickly here. But basically, those are the kind of three things that she offers as a frame, and I think in a kind of a different context, but I think also work in the digital realm. When we teach our students how to do online research or how to relate to digital arenas, is that we teach them to look at their stakes in location, the stakes of embodiment, and the stakes of partial perspective. And so location, where are you in relation to the technology that you use? Here, as opposed to Microsoft's where do you want to go today? You know, and that's that God's eye view Donna Hairaway talks about. Where do you want to go today? You can go anywhere, right? You don't even have to leave your chair. That's that hopping. As opposed to thinking the God's eye view, as opposed to where do you want to go today, think where am I today? Where am I in relationship to this information? Where does it stretch historically? Where does it come into the future? How do I position myself related to this? How does my position, gender, class, my education level, my privilege or my lack of privilege affect the way in which I'm going to look and research at this topic and think about this topic? Where is the author? You know, I mean, I think if there's not anything else that we can teach our students about researching online, especially on the World Wide Web, is where is the author? Who is the author? Where do they stand? What is their location? How do we place them? And that doesn't mean to sort of essentialize that, but to simply say that's something that needs to be looked at. These things aren't free floating. When we count ourselves out as readers and as writers, we give the agency over to the machine. And that's one of the things I saw your students doing. You know, somehow this machine, I give over to them all of the responsibility that I should take myself. And when you give that responsibility over, when you don't mark your location, that's when you sort of lose that ability to contribute and to get from. Stakes and embodiment. The most discourses of technology write the body out. Again, it's that kind of God's eye view. And so that just not to adopt a culture of guilt when you say, oh, I have access to this, and you know, people in the third world don't or anything, but to recognize always and to think about the materiality of technology and how it affects people, how the things that you're looking at, researching, investigating, affect real people in real bodies who have a specific historical location and aren't kind of free-floating. And probably most important is partial perspective. The knowledge that we have access to always is only one tiny sliver of the truth. It's only one tiny specific location that looks out onto a piece of information that we're given, a piece of truth that we're given. It's only a partial perspective. It's never that God's eye view. And so to teach our students that, the kind of holistic model, to understand, even if you don't have access to all the other perspectives, to understand that where we stand is only partial perspective and that there's another whole, many, many other ways of looking at this issue, many, many other documents, probably many, many other historical worldviews that would answer to this. And so I think that, I know those are all rather vague, but I sort of challenge you, I guess, to think about those things in relation to your teaching and learning and how they might impact in a more positive way so that we get students and researchers and ourselves and each other grounded, specific in relation to some of this technology and not sort of floating through cyberspace. And I want to close with a quote by, I don't know if you guys know Myron Tuman. This is called WordPerfect Literacy in the Computer Age. He's really good. It's a really good theorist. And he talks here at the end, I'll close with him. What online literacy must provide us, if it is to replace and not merely subvert print, is a new way of fashioning that universal narrative of human history, a new way of retelling the ongoing tale of our collective struggle to become what we are capable of imagining, a new way of shaping that most compelling image of who we want to be. What we must learn to do with the computer-based tools of literacy, hypertext, networking, and multimedia, among others, is to connect ourselves to history, in the words of Richard Kearney, to remember the past and to project a future.
We have a couple of minutes to ask Ivan, Mike, and Michelle questions. You're overwhelmed.
Do you have any thoughts on, I have a problem with some of my students that I can't possibly be the only one, where some of them actively rebel against the technology. Do you have any thoughts about what it is exactly that they're rebelling against?
Well, a lot of times it's simply based on fear. When I teach a lot of computer-mediated environments, and I always get a portion of those students who are sort of afraid that they're not going to know how to do it, or they're not going to do it right, or they're going to break the machine, or they're going to, there's all sorts of kind of lurking kind of technophobias that sometimes get projected as hostility. And there's really, the only way around that is to sort of make them do it and kind of sort of make them realize that those kind of fears that underlie some of that hostility are not valid or are something they can overcome. I don't know more than that.
Well, I've tried making them do it. And that's not working either. And quite frankly, it's not very consistent with the rest of my teaching style. I don't like making them do things. I prefer to be partners in their education. And so technology, that's the last holdout. I can get them to write, which is hard enough, but I can get them to write now, and not hate it as much. But I always have one or two students, and it happens with every section in our law school, every writing professor has one or two students who will refuse to get on the computer. And I'm wondering if it's not this kind of, you're trying to turn me into this mindless person. I don't want to go where you're telling me I have to go.
That's quite possible. I think that those are cultural attitudes of technology determine where we come. A lot of it depends on, I think, sort of, a lot of my students, I teach a college that has a lot of non-traditionally aged students, and there's a lot of resistance to computers and to the idea that that it's going to, or that they think it's going to take over print literacy. They think it's going to be like more like MTV or that kind of thing, and so they resist that kind of.
I try to tell them we've disabled the brain suckers. They don't believe me, but it's not true. No.
Question for Michael. The picture you painted of the student as a cyborg, I found a little bit disturbing. I'm just wondering, I know you said at the end you had no sweeping or earth-shattering ideas, but where do you start changing them from becoming that machine-like information gatherer to being a little more in contact with their material, with its context, etc.? Is that in do you have to change the way legal research is taught, advanced legal research, or?
Well, one of the things that Bob Bering and Kathleen have done as they've taught this class over the years is, and Bob's very keen on doing this, he'll say, okay, here's the research problem that you're facing. You've got 30 minutes to do it, or you've got 2 hours. And of course you're relying, it's on the honor system, you're relying on the student to really only spend that amount of time doing it, because if you do only have, trying to create real-world conditions for them to be doing the research in. I mean, if they're sitting in a law firm, they can't spend 7 hours on Westlaw researching a problem. They can do, they'll probably get fired after eventually. And I think trying to create as much real-world conditions in the legal research teaching is sometimes useful. I've known that talking to other people who taught T classes, they get them to keep a log of their research. Went online at this time and spent an hour and a half. I mean, and then trying to look at that and say, well, if you were, working in a law firm, could you really do this? Is this really realistic? And I think that the fact that they have unlimited access to Lexis and Westlaw with no bearing on cost. I mean, students don't come out of law school thinking, well, if I really did this in real world, this is going to cost the law firm $500 or something. And I think trying to impose some of the real world conditions on them might force the students to think a little closer about how they do their research.
What about the analytical piece, where, as it's been described, students are just grabbing law bites and finding the terms that they think are key based on facts rather than the law. I'm wondering how we can sort of put the law bites together with the analysis that students need to learn, get deep by the word, get into the position to help you.
I don't know, does anybody else have any suggestions about how they do that? Because I think that is the sort of crux of this problem here.
Well, Lisa, to follow up on that, have you looked at see what has happened to the quality of pathfinders? I mean, I do sort of an advanced legal research, the Bob method, and I mean, one of the things that I'm finding, basically, is that, and I don't know sort of why this is. I've been at 3 different institutions doing this, but it seems to me the analysis and the quality is going down as there's more and more stuff. I'm in this introspective. It's me. Am I not putting the energy into it? And I'm finding that I'm just not seeing the quality that I saw. As there's so much that they become overwhelmed, and the quality seems to, and they're not making those connections, that analysis. The connections that used to be there don't seem to be there anymore. And I'm ready to just have someone else teach it. Maybe it's me. But I mean, have you looked at through years to see?
Well, actually, what I found, I think, is maybe related to this. In fact, our students are doing Pathfinders less than they used to. I mean, for those of you who don't know, in advanced legal research, Bob Bering sort of came up with an idea that they would do a research guide to a particular area, of the law. It could be, how to be a hermit or something like that. And I found, I've been doing this for 5 or 6 years, and the same number of students take the class all the time. And in the last few years, I've noticed that there's fewer and fewer people embarking on trying to do a research guide to a particular area, and it's maybe related to the same point, is that maybe they're just so overwhelmed with the amount of resources that are out there that it becomes for them almost an impossible task to try and cap this and do it. And if they do try and do it, maybe the quality is going down as well because they can't grapple with the sheer amount of resources. Maybe the two are related.
One of the things that I did in teaching, I mean, this is in a different field, so with a grain of salt, but in teaching research writing in my field, is that I had my students construct arguments hypertextually online, which forced them to take kind of the other side of the screen and to sort of think through the real complicated connections between the stuff that they wanted to link together. Like, why would you link this to this? You know, why would this particular instance link to this example? Is it good? Will your reader, viewer understand that clearly? Is there a context for it? And in sort of putting them on the other side of the screen, making them create a hypertextual, say like maybe a research model, like give them a particular problem and say create and access a research model that would show that on screen, make those links yourself and supply the context for them. That's kind of one way to get that analytical jump that they don't, you know, they sort of make on the computer screen but they don't make here, is to turn them into the kind of writer, constructor of those and make them articulate them.
I did that, but it was greater success and greater failure. I found it sort of on both. I mean, like the web, creating a web-based product overwhelmed some, and then some just make incredible products. I mean, you know, I want to just look at the top third and say, you know, I was a success, and then look at the bottom. It makes me more interaction. Maybe just that we need much more greater involvement. It's, you know, the sage on the stage kind of thing is so gone by the wayside that it's just. They just need to have constant handholding. I mean, I don't know. I'm going to reduce the class size.
Right. We're also doing students that are more and more sophisticated all the time. I mean, part of this is that we're really at the beginning of this, you know, and if we think about the kind of background and history we have in print literacy, it's several hundred years in learning how to evaluate printed sources and learning how to, you know, the kind of political and ideological structures that have grown up behind books and, you know, and journals and that kind of thing. We don't have that for online. And so part of these problems are things that aren't easily solved just in kind of changing our pedagogy. I mean, part of these problems are going to be things that are going to change as we get students more and more comfortable in computer environments. And then, you know, we're going to see that learning curve at that bottom third of the students who can't do it. That's going to become a smaller and smaller percentage.
One of the things, a couple of things that I've done teaching advanced legal research, this year I did have my Pathfinders done as web pages for the first time, and it was, again, like Michael says, it's a mixed bag. I have some extraordinary ones which will go up this summer, and then I had two people who simply couldn't do it. You know, they produced the Pathfinder in Word or WordPerfect and handed in a printout, and that was it. And couldn't deal with figuring out how to learn how to use front page or you know, anything like that. I think it will change as, you know, the generations coming in now. I mean, I saw a huge sea change in the student population this year with their you know, familiarity and their comfort level with technology. In the first year class teaching Lexis and Westlaw, it was, you know, it was a no-brainer. You didn't have to talk about any of the basics anymore about how the computer works really or that kind of stuff. A little bit, but things they take for granted. But you have to explain that no, you're just matching strings and stuff like that. You know, those kinds of things. But the other thing I did in advanced legal research is give them some exercises in which it didn't work to do those basic fact kinds of word searches. You really needed context. And they learned about ALR, which, of course, they never learn about in first year of legal research anymore, unfortunately. And they discovered a whole new tool, which was really a great thing, because all of a sudden they did start to get the concept of someplace that gave you analysis, and they had to start thinking in terms of context. And that was a great discovery for many of them, which, you know, I felt like I did something good just from that.
Just to follow up on that, we give our first year students, this is in the UK, we give our first year students a very simple search to do using Lexis and using the library. It's deliberately designed so there are differences, and we ask them what the differences and why there are differences. An important lesson for the students to learn straight away is that you get different results using the different medium. And that is quite a valuable lesson early on. You can think of examples to do. And very short things that they're simple and comfortable with, you can do quickly. But it's a very good lesson for them straight away at the outset of teaching legal research at any time.
I think one of the things that complicates this is the conventions of legal writing. Legal writing is presented in such a way that the author looks like they were born knowing this stuff. all of the learning process has been written out of it. So you don't get one of the things the author doesn't convey is how they come to understand this. They cite directly to the primary sources as if, they say, they were born knowing them. And so that encourages unsophisticated people approaching it for the first time to think that this must be how I do it too. I take direct jackpot searches into the database, and I find a few primary sources, and I base my argument directly on that. One of the things I think you have to do is reconstruct the learning process. Say, you need ALRs, you need treatises, you need digests, whatever else, because nobody was born knowing this. And perhaps an interesting kind of writing assignment would be one where the written product is not something like a brief or a memorandum, but is one that describes that learning process, and then let people read each other's.
One thing we do that we've had a little bit more success with last year in teaching research specifically is we teach research in the order that we want them to research. We teach secondary sources first. We don't start with cases and statutes. So we give them a problem that we know they know nothing about and say, go to the ALRs. And then we teach the research in the order of the research process. The very last thing we put on there is Lexis and Westlaw. They don't get Lexis and Westlaw until second semester when they already know how to research. And so my students already know not to come to me and tell me I couldn't find anything on Lexis or Westlaw, because they know the first question I'm going to say is, have you been to ALR? And so they don't come to me until they've been to ALR. And we had a lot of success with that last year. The research was so much better when we did it that way.
But don't you have students that right from day one say, where's Lexis and Westlaw?
Right.
Sure, and we tell them, and what we tell them is, you didn't walk into first grade and get handed a calculator. You got handed a pencil and a piece of paper. And once you knew how to add on paper, then you got to use a calculator. And that's how we're going to do it here.
But then they'll say, and after I learned how to use a calculator, I never used pencil and paper again. And that's where I
haven't had any problem explaining it to them. They seem to understand the learning theory behind. You have to know how the machine works before we can actually let you use the machine. They seem to understand that.
Any other questions? Thank you.